The moment Officer Ryan Mitchell placed his hand on the driver's side window, 3 federal agencies started paying attention, but he had absolutely no idea. The late afternoon sun hung low over Interstate 85, casting long shadows across the asphalt as traffic rolled steadily through central Georgia. Patrol lights flashed blue and red against the polished black SUV parked on the shoulder, drawing curious glances from passing drivers. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out of his cruiser with the confidence of a man who believed he was always in control. For nearly 12 years, he had worn a badge, and somewhere along the way, that badge had become more than a symbol of service. It had become a shield for his assumptions. Inside the SUV sat a woman who appeared remarkably calm for someone who had just been pulled over. Her name was Vanessa Carter. She wore a navy blazer, simple pearl earrings, and an expression that never seemed to change. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as she watched the officer approach. No nervous movements. No frantic searching for documents. No visible concern. Just quiet patience. Ryan immediately noticed that calmness, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it irritated him. Most drivers became anxious during traffic stops. Most people rushed to explain themselves before he even asked a question. But not this woman. The silence between them felt different. As Ryan reached the window, he glanced at the license plate, then back at Vanessa. "License and registration," he said sharply. Vanessa nodded politely and retrieved the documents without argument. Her movements were steady, practiced, almost disciplined. Ryan studied her face, waiting for signs of discomfort. Instead, he found something else. Confidence. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. A faint crackle came through his radio. Then another. Dispatch seemed unusually active. Ryan ignored it. His attention remained fixed on the woman in front of him. Several vehicles passed slowly, their drivers turning their heads toward the scene. A teenager in a pickup truck briefly raised a phone toward the shoulder before continuing down the highway. Vanessa noticed none of it, or at least she acted as though she didn't. Her eyes remained calm, focused, unreadable. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Ryan asked. Vanessa looked at him for a moment before answering. "No, officer. I don't." Her voice was measured and composed, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to pressure. That answer should have ended the exchange. Instead, it was only the beginning. Because while Ryan Mitchell saw a black woman alone on the side of a highway, somewhere far beyond that stretch of Georgia pavement, people with far more authority than him were already noticing that something had gone very, very wrong. Ryan took the documents from Vanessa and walked back toward his cruiser, but something about the encounter stayed with him. The warm Georgia air carried the distant sound of engines moving along the interstate, while the flashing patrol lights painted brief streaks of color across the pavement. Inside the cruiser, he began reviewing her information. Everything appeared legitimate. The registration matched the vehicle. The driver's license was valid. There were no warrants, no alerts, no obvious reasons for concern. Yet instead of ending the stop, Ryan found himself studying the screen longer than necessary. Across the highway, Vanessa remained seated exactly as before. She did not reach for her phone. She did not appear frustrated. She simply waited. That patience unsettled him more than any argument could have. Most people wanted answers. Most people wanted to know how long a stop would take. Vanessa seemed completely unaffected by the delay. Ryan glanced through the windshield at her vehicle once again. It was clean, well-maintained, and surprisingly ordinary. There was nothing flashy about it, nothing that demanded attention. And yet he could not shake the feeling that something important was missing from the picture. His radio crackled again. Dispatch requested confirmation of his location. The tone sounded unusual, more formal than normal. Ryan responded quickly and dismissed the thought. A few moments later, another transmission followed. Then another. He frowned. Interstate traffic stops rarely generated this much communication. Meanwhile, inside the SUV, Vanessa slowly turned her gaze toward the horizon. The sun was beginning its descent, casting golden light across miles of open roadway. Her expression remained composed, but her mind was carefully measuring every passing minute. She knew people would notice the delay. She knew certain schedules could not shift without questions being asked. Still, she made no attempt to intervene. Years of experience had taught her that patience often revealed more than confrontation ever could. Back in the cruiser, Ryan opened another database search. Then another. Each result returned the same answer. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Yet somehow that only deepened his frustration. He stepped out of the vehicle and looked toward the SUV again. At that exact moment, a dark helicopter appeared far in the distance, moving steadily across the afternoon sky. It remained little more than a silhouette against the sunlight, easy for most people to ignore. Ryan barely noticed it. Vanessa did. Her eyes followed it for only a second before returning to the road ahead. The helicopter continued moving west. A faint breeze crossed the shoulder of the highway. Traffic flowed past. Everything looked normal. But somewhere beyond what either of them could see, phone calls were already being made, schedules were already changing, and people in offices hundreds of miles away were beginning to ask the same question. Why had Vanessa Carter stopped moving? Ryan closed the final database window and stepped out of his cruiser once again. The sun sat lower now, turning the sky into a mixture of gold and orange as shadows stretched across the shoulder of the interstate. A line of vehicles passed by at 70 miles per hour, their drivers briefly slowing to observe the scene before disappearing into the distance. Vanessa remained exactly where she had been for the past several minutes. Calm, patient, completely unmoved by the growing delay. Ryan approached the SUV with measured steps, his expression tightening as he reached the driver's window. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he said. Vanessa looked at him quietly. "May I ask why?" she replied. The question was respectful, but something about it immediately irritated him. "I am conducting an extended inspection," Ryan answered. "Please step out of the vehicle." Vanessa studied him for a moment before unfastening her seatbelt and exiting the SUV. She moved with controlled precision, standing beside the vehicle while the warm afternoon breeze tugged gently at her jacket. Ryan noticed it again. That unusual confidence. That complete lack of fear. Imagine standing there while someone with authority keeps changing the rules, keeps extending an encounter without explanation, and still choosing not to lose your composure. Vanessa had spent years operating in environments where pressure was constant. This roadside stop was not going to shake her. But Ryan interpreted her calmness differently. To him, it looked like defiance. A small crowd was beginning to form in the digital world. Drivers passing by were recording short clips through open windows. A truck driver slowed briefly before continuing down the highway. Somewhere, someone uploaded a video. Then another. The flashing patrol lights, the black SUV, the woman standing quietly beside it. None of it seemed remarkable yet. Ryan began circling the vehicle, examining every detail as though he expected to discover something hidden in plain sight. He checked the tires. He studied the windows. He looked through the windshield. The longer he searched, the more frustrated he became. Everything appeared normal. Vanessa watched without speaking. Her silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. Suddenly, her phone vibrated inside her jacket pocket. She glanced at the screen but did not answer. Ryan immediately noticed. "You are not going to take that call," he said. Vanessa looked at the display for only a second before placing the phone back in her pocket. "Understood," she replied calmly. The screen went dark. What Ryan did not see was the name attached to the missed call. What he did not know was that multiple people were now attempting to reach her. And what he could not possibly imagine was that each unanswered minute was creating concern in places far beyond a Georgia highway. As the silence returned, another helicopter appeared in the distance, flying lower than the first. This time Vanessa noticed it immediately. Ryan did not. He remained focused on proving something he could not define, while the situation around him was quietly becoming much bigger than either of them could see. The second helicopter disappeared beyond a line of distant trees, but the uneasy feeling hanging over the highway remained. Ryan folded his arms and stared at the black SUV as though it personally offended him. The longer he stood there, the more determined he became to justify the stop. Across from him, Vanessa maintained the same composed posture. The afternoon heat had begun to soften, and the first hints of evening drifted across the open road. Traffic continued moving steadily, but more drivers were slowing down now. Several phones appeared from open windows. Some people simply glanced and kept driving. Others sensed that something unusual was unfolding. Ryan returned to the driver's side of the SUV and looked through the window once more. A leather folder rested neatly on the passenger seat. Beside it sat a sealed envelope marked with official-looking lettering. Nothing about either item suggested anything improper, yet his attention immediately fixed on them. "What is inside the folder?" he asked. Vanessa met his gaze. Personal work materials. What kind of work? Ryan pressed. Professional responsibilities, she answered calmly. Her response contained no attitude, no challenge, no hostility. Yet the lack of explanation only seemed to frustrate him further. Imagine standing on the side of a highway while someone keeps demanding answers that become less about facts and more about assumptions. Vanessa understood exactly what was happening. She had seen it before. Not necessarily in this form, not necessarily on this road, but she recognized the pattern. The conversation had stopped being about traffic long ago. A sharp tone suddenly crackled through Ryan's radio. Dispatch was calling again. He stepped away and answered. The voice on the other end requested an update. Ryan gave a brief response and ended the transmission. Seconds later, the radio activated once more. Then again, he frowned. This was becoming unusual. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away, inside a secure federal office, a woman in a gray business suit studied a digital map displayed across multiple monitors. A blinking marker remained stationary along Interstate 85. She checked the time and exchanged a concerned glance with a colleague. "She is still stopped?" the colleague asked. The woman nodded slowly. Neither of them liked that answer. Back on the highway, Ryan continued questioning Vanessa, but her composure never changed. Every answer was respectful. Every response was measured. She neither rushed nor hesitated. The calmness that had initially irritated him was now becoming impossible to ignore. Then another vibration came from her phone. This time it was followed almost immediately by a second notification. Then a third. Vanessa remained still. She did not reach for the device. She simply allowed the alerts to pass unanswered. Ryan noticed. So did several drivers recording from a distance. Somewhere online, short clips from the traffic stop were already spreading beyond Georgia. And while Ryan believed he was controlling the situation, the truth was far different. Every passing minute was drawing more attention from people who knew exactly who Vanessa Carter was, even if he did not. What Ryan Mitchell did not know was that the woman standing quietly beside the highway had spent more than 2 decades carrying responsibilities that most Americans would never even hear about. Long before this roadside stop, long before the flashing patrol lights and unanswered phone calls, Vanessa Carter had built a reputation in places where performance mattered more than appearances. She had graduated near the top of her class, earned the respect of commanders across multiple assignments, and developed a leadership style that made people listen without ever needing to raise her voice. Those who worked alongside her often described the same quality: calm under pressure, focused when others panicked, reliable when situations became difficult. That reputation had opened doors that remained closed to most people. It had also placed extraordinary responsibilities on her shoulders. Earlier that morning, Vanessa had left a secure facility before sunrise. The mission she was supporting was not the kind that appeared in newspapers or on television. It involved coordination, logistics, planning, and the careful movement of sensitive information. Nothing dramatic, nothing glamorous, just the kind of work that helped keep larger systems functioning without interruption. Her route through Georgia had been planned down to the minute. Multiple checkpoints expected her arrival. Several officials anticipated briefings later that evening. Every schedule depended on timing. Every delay created questions. And now those questions were multiplying. Inside a conference room hundreds of miles away, a digital clock continued advancing while several officials studied updated reports. One chair remained empty. One expected arrival had not arrived. A senior administrator tapped a pen against the table. "Any contact?" he asked. The answer came quickly. No direct response yet. The room fell silent. Back on Interstate 85, the setting sun reflected against the dark paint of Vanessa's SUV. The shoulder of the highway seemed strangely quiet despite the steady flow of traffic. Ryan continued searching for reasons to justify his suspicions, while Vanessa continued giving him no reason at all. Imagine knowing exactly who you are while someone else insists on defining you through assumptions. Imagine possessing credentials, experience, and responsibilities beyond anything they could imagine, yet choosing patience instead of confrontation. That was the decision Vanessa kept making minute after minute. Another notification illuminated her phone screen. Then another. The list of missed calls continued growing. Names appeared briefly before fading away again. Some came from government offices, others from secure contacts. All of them carried the same message. People were looking for her. Ryan noticed the phone once more and frowned. He still believed he was uncovering something hidden. In reality, the opposite was true. The longer this stop continued, the more attention it attracted from people who already understood exactly how important Vanessa Carter was. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a chain of events had already begun moving toward Interstate 85, closing the distance 1 mile at a time. The atmosphere along the interstate had changed in ways Ryan could not yet recognize. The highway looked the same. The traffic still flowed. The patrol lights still flashed across the pavement. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, the situation was quietly accelerating beyond his control. Ryan stood beside the SUV and checked his watch. Nearly an hour had passed since the stop began. What should have been a routine interaction had turned into something neither simple nor routine. Still convinced that he was uncovering something important, he decided to push further. "I need to know exactly where you are going," he said. Vanessa looked at him calmly. "I am traveling for official business." "What kind of official business?" Ryan asked. "Business I am not authorized to discuss here," she replied. The answer was respectful, professional, but it was not the answer Ryan wanted. He shook his head and paced a few steps away. Every instinct told him he should have already found a reason for his suspicions. Instead, every question seemed to produce another dead end. The radio on his shoulder suddenly crackled again. This time the dispatcher sounded unusually serious. A supervisor was requesting immediate contact. Ryan acknowledged the message but delayed the call. He wanted to finish what he had started. That decision would prove far more important than he realized. Vanessa remained standing beside the vehicle, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the horizon. In the distance, a faint line of headlights had appeared. At first they looked like ordinary traffic. Then she noticed their formation. Several vehicles traveling together, maintaining distance, moving steadily toward their location. She said nothing. Across the country, notifications continued moving through secure communication channels. Schedules were being revised, meetings delayed, questions asked. A transportation coordinator in Washington reviewed an updated report and frowned. A military liaison checked his phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Elsewhere, an operations officer stared at a map showing the same stationary marker that had not moved for over an hour. Nobody liked unexplained delays, especially not delays involving someone with Vanessa Carter's responsibilities. Back on Interstate 85, Ryan finally contacted his supervisor. The conversation was brief. The questions coming from the other end of the radio were surprisingly direct. Why was the stop taking so long? Had there been a violation? Was assistance needed? Ryan answered confidently, insisting everything was under control. When the call ended, he felt reassured. Vanessa felt something entirely different. She knew the timeline was reaching its limit, not because she intended to change anything, but because other people eventually would. The distant headlights grew brighter. The vehicles were closing the gap mile by mile. The warm evening sunlight reflected across their windshields as they approached from the west. Ryan still had no idea who Vanessa Carter really was. He still believed he was the one directing events on that stretch of highway. But for the first time since the stop began, the balance was beginning to shift, and very soon everyone on Interstate 85 would understand why. The approaching vehicles became impossible to ignore. What had started as distant headlights now formed a clearly organized convoy moving steadily through the evening traffic. Ryan narrowed his eyes as the lead vehicle activated emergency authorization lights mounted behind its windshield. One by one, several dark government SUVs pulled onto the shoulder nearly 200 yards ahead. Traffic immediately began slowing. Drivers turned their heads. Phones rose higher. The atmosphere changed in an instant. Ryan felt it before he understood it. Vanessa remained calm. If anything, she seemed even more relaxed than before. The convoy doors opened. Men and women in professional attire stepped out first, followed by several uniformed personnel whose presence immediately commanded attention. None of them appeared rushed. None of them appeared confused. They moved with the confidence of people who already knew exactly where they were going. Ryan's radio suddenly erupted with activity. Multiple transmissions overlapped. Dispatch called his name twice. Then a supervisor's voice came through. Then another. For the first time all afternoon, Ryan felt genuine uncertainty. He grabbed the radio and responded. The answer that came back caused him to freeze. Remain where you are. Senior officials are arriving on scene. Before Ryan could ask another question, The transmission ended. The evening air seemed strangely quiet despite the traffic surrounding them. One of the arriving officials began walking directly toward Vanessa. Another spoke into a secure communication device. A third reviewed information on a tablet while occasionally glancing in her direction. None of them paid attention to Ryan. Not at first. Imagine standing there believing you are the most important person in the situation, only to realize the situation was never about you at all. That realization was beginning to settle over the shoulder of Interstate 85. Several passing drivers had now stopped completely in nearby parking areas. More cameras appeared. The convoy itself looked significant enough to attract attention, but it was the expressions on the faces of the arriving personnel that stood out. They were concerned, not alarmed, not panicked, concerned, as though someone important had been delayed somewhere they were never supposed to be delayed. One of the officials finally approached Vanessa and quietly asked if she was all right. She nodded once. Nothing more. The official visibly relaxed. That simple exchange did not escape Ryan's notice. A few moments later, a uniformed officer from another agency approached him. The man's posture was respectful but serious. "Officer Mitchell," he said, "there are individuals here who need to speak with you." Ryan glanced toward Vanessa. For the first time since the stop began, he noticed something he had completely overlooked. Nobody arriving treated her like an ordinary traveler. Nobody questioned her presence. Nobody doubted who she was. Instead, every person who stepped onto that shoulder seemed to recognize her immediately. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, Ryan began to understand that the answer he had been searching for all afternoon was about to reveal itself, whether he was ready for it or not. The final pieces fell into place with surprising simplicity. A senior military officer stepped forward from the convoy and approached Vanessa with immediate recognition. His posture straightened. His tone carried unmistakable respect. "Colonel Carter," he said, "we have been trying to reach you for over an hour." For a brief moment, the sounds of the highway seemed to fade into the background. Ryan stood motionless. The title echoed in his mind. Colonel, not consultant, not administrator, not civilian contractor. Colonel. The officer continued speaking, updating her on schedules, briefings, and personnel who had been waiting for her arrival. Vanessa listened calmly, asking only a few concise questions before nodding. The conversation was professional and efficient, the kind that happens between people accustomed to carrying significant responsibility. Several others gathered nearby. Some wore military uniforms. Others represented federal agencies. Every one of them addressed Vanessa with the same level of respect. Nobody questioned her identity. Nobody seemed surprised to see her. In fact, the only person who appeared shocked was Ryan. Imagine spending an entire afternoon assuming you understand someone, only to discover you never knew the first thing about them. Ryan replayed every moment of the traffic stop in his head. The unanswered calls, the unusual radio traffic, the arriving convoy, the confidence, the patience. Suddenly it all made sense. Vanessa had never acted nervous because she had nothing to fear. She had never argued because she had never needed to. Her confidence had come from knowing exactly who she was. A federal official approached Ryan and quietly requested information about the stop. The conversation remained professional, but Ryan could feel the weight of every question. How long had the delay lasted? What justification had been documented? Why had the encounter continued after the initial review? None of the questions were hostile, yet each one seemed heavier than the last. Nearby, several of the people who had been recording from a distance continued watching. Some had already uploaded videos online. Thousands of viewers were beginning to see the story unfold in real time. But the most remarkable part was not the arrival of government vehicles or senior officials. It was Vanessa herself. Despite everything, she showed no anger, no desire to embarrass anyone, no attempt to use her position to create a spectacle. She simply focused on the responsibilities waiting ahead. As the evening sky darkened above Interstate 85, the convoy prepared to depart. The mission that had been delayed could finally continue. And standing beside the shoulder of that highway, Ryan Mitchell came face to face with a truth far larger than rank or authority. He had spent the entire day looking at Vanessa Carter through assumptions. Everyone else saw a leader. Everyone else saw a decorated officer entrusted with significant responsibilities. The difference was not what Vanessa revealed. The difference was what Ryan had failed to see. The convoy eventually pulled away from the shoulder of Interstate 85, disappearing into the darkness of the Georgia evening one vehicle at a time. The flashing lights faded. The traffic returned to normal. The crowd of curious onlookers moved on. Within minutes, the highway looked almost exactly as it had before. Yet for Ryan Mitchell, nothing felt the same. He remained beside his patrol car for a long moment, staring at the empty stretch of road where Vanessa Carter's SUV had stood. The silence around him felt heavier than any conversation he had experienced that day. Over the following weeks, reviews were conducted, reports were examined, and questions were asked. Procedures were evaluated. Decisions were scrutinized. The attention surrounding the incident extended far beyond a single traffic stop. Video clips continued circulating online, generating discussions among people from every background. Some focused on authority. Others focused on professionalism. But many saw something deeper. They saw how quickly assumptions could shape the way one person viewed another. Ryan found himself revisiting the encounter repeatedly. Not because of the convoy. Not because of the senior officials. Not even because of Vanessa's rank. What stayed with him was her composure. She had every opportunity to react with anger. Every opportunity to create conflict. Instead, she remained patient from beginning to end. The more he reflected on that choice, the more difficult it became to ignore the lessons hidden inside the experience. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued her work. The delayed mission moved forward. Meetings resumed. Responsibilities returned to their normal pace. To her, the incident became one chapter in a much larger career defined by service, discipline, and leadership. Those who knew her were not surprised by how she handled the situation. It was exactly what they expected from someone who had spent a lifetime earning respect through character rather than demanding it through status. Months later, a young officer attending a professional development seminar listened as an instructor discussed the importance of judgment, perception, and accountability. Among the examples presented was a simple reminder. The people you meet are often carrying stories, responsibilities, and experiences you cannot see. The instructor paused before adding one final thought. Never assume you understand someone based on appearance alone. Across the room, dozens of officers listened quietly. It was a lesson that extended far beyond law enforcement. It applied to every workplace, every community, and every human interaction. Because respect begins where assumptions end. And sometimes the most important thing a person can learn is that dignity does not come from a title, a uniform, or a position. It comes from recognizing the value in others before you know who they are. On that evening in Georgia, one person saw only what he expected to see. The rest of the nation eventually saw something different. They saw a leader. They saw professionalism under pressure. They saw grace where conflict could have existed. And in the end, the lesson echoed far beyond a single highway. He saw a black woman. The nation saw a leader.